Moving forward then on capacity development for resilience, developing the capacities of a community, organization, society, or any other human environment system for resilience entails grasping two fundamental challenges. First of all, we must grasp resilience, the functions that contribute to it, and the complexity of actual forms on different levels that in turn contributes that in turn contribute to performing the functions in practice. In other words, we must have technical knowledge and skills within disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, or any other community practice that actively promotes resilience. However, such knowledge and skills are necessary but not sufficient for effective capacity development for resilience. We must also grasp more process-oriented aspects of how capacity can be developed in general. Just knowing what it is doesn't really help completely. Capacity development for resilience is a multifaceted subject, and I devote the following three subsections to present the ideas for defining, designing, and deconditioning it. Okay, so defining capacity development for resilience. Before it is possible to define the before it is possible to define the concept of capacity development, we need to consider the meaning of capacity in the first place. Among other meanings, Oxford English Dictionary defines capacity as the ability or power to do, experience, or understand something, with capability as the closest synonym. In other words, it has in this context to do with the ability of a specific human environment system to perform functions that are central for its resilience. Remember, we talked about what function is before. However, one of the most influential definitions of capacity in relation to capacity development focuses on a more concrete level of abstraction when stating that capacity is the combination of all the strengths, attributes, and resources available within a community, society, or organization that can be used to achieve agreed upon goals. So this comes from the United Nations Institute for Sustainable Development Research, I suspect, or you can look it up. Here, capacity has to do with with form instead of function. Here, capacity has to do with form instead of function. Okay, so should we read it again? Here, the combination of all the strengths, attributes, and resources available within a community, society, or organization that can be used to achieve agreed upon goals. Remembering Rasmussen's abstraction hierarchy presented in chapter 6, the important thing is that these two definitions do not compete but complement each other. If capacity is the ability of a specific human environment system to perform functions that are central to its resilience, then this capacity stems from the complex combination of form on all four levels that we talked about before. Okay, so although capacity development is a much more specialized concept than capacity itself, which should cater to less terminological ambiguity, it is rather interesting to see the plethora of versions coming out of most organizations involved in practice in developing capacity. Not that all versions bring anything new to the table. On the contrary, most new definitions of capacity development that I find are mostly saying the same thing but with slightly different words. First of all, I would dare to say that more or less all of them describe capacity development as a process. I would dare to say that more or less all of them describe capacity development as a process. Secondly, almost all of them specify different levels of society on which capacity development can take place, out of which the three levels of individual, organizational, and societal are the most prevalent. Finally, almost all definitions describe capacity development in relation to the capacity of achieving goals or objectives. So for instance, the arguably most influential of these definitions state that states, the most influential states, that capacity development is the process through which individuals, organizations and societies obtain, strengthen and maintain the capabilities to set and achieve their own development objectives over time. So ownership is implied in there. So let's read box 9.1 and finish this podcast. I have to run to another meeting soon. So many competing definitions of capacity development for UNDP. Let's just look up UNISDR before we go forward. UNISDR. I always guess that it's something. Nope, that's UNDRR. Did it change its name? So it's disaster risk. Already I was on the wrong track. United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. That's UNISDR. No, that's, yeah. That is UNDRR. What is UNISDR? UNISDR. Yes, I know. United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. So that has changed its name, I suppose. So it's called International Strategy for this United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction. I don't know. So there you go. They keep changing names, so it's not my fault. Nonetheless, the process through which, so UNDP says capacity development is the process through which individuals, organizations and societies obtain, strengthen and maintain the capabilities to set and achieve their own development objectives over time, as we just read. UNISDR says the process by which the people, organizations and society systematically stimulate and develop their capacities over time to achieve social and economic goals, including through improvement of knowledge, skills, systems and institutions. This is from 2009. Both are from 2009. The World Bank, on the other hand, says capacity development is a locally driven process of learning by leaders, coalitions and other agents of change that brings about changes in socio-political, policy-related and organizational factors to enhance local ownership for and the effectiveness and efficiency of efforts to achieve a development goal. So that was also from 2009. DFID says OECD, I know. Trust me, I actually, when I read the book, I always look these up. And so that's Department for International Development, DFID. Yeah, so Department for International Development, DFID, and GTZ, which will come up next. GTZ is Deutsche, so it's a government word, also Corporation for International Cooperation with Worldwide Operations. Alright, so DFID says Department for International Development. Okay. The process whereby individuals, groups and organizations enhance their abilities to mobilize and use resources in order to achieve their objectives on a sustainable basis. That's from 2008. OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the process whereby people, organizations and society as a whole unleash, strengthen, create, adapt and maintain capacity over time. So that's OECD from 2006. GTZ, German organization, says the process of strengthening the abilities or capacities of individuals, organizations and societies to make effective and efficient use of resources in order to achieve their own goals on a sustainable basis. This is from 2003. So let's just read up a bit more. Although the definitions of capacity development rarely explicitly acknowledge it, capacity development is inherently connected to situations in which an actor gets outside support to develop capacities. So Global South gets help from World Bank and developing countries and various foundations. In other words, it entails a relationship between an internal partner who is the one inspiring capacity development and an external partner who's the one supposed to support the process. However, this relationship is rarely that simple, as I present later in this chapter. In other words, if internal partners are developing their capacities all by themselves, we generally do not call it capacity development. Why? We'll see that. But just normal improvement of their performance is what it amounts to if you are just working by yourselves. It is first when an external partner gets involved that the process turns into capacity development with all its challenges and potential benefits. Is it just definition, or is it that only outsiders can monitor and evaluate and tell you where the gaps are and where you actually need to develop your capacities? That said, capacity development is not requiring international support, though that is what most capacity development literature is about. It also includes the support of a municipal agricultural extension worker to the development of a community's capacity to reduce drought risk, a county administrative board support to the capacity development of municipalities' preparedness planning, the support of an organizational consultant to turn an outdated governmental authority into a well-functioning agency, etc. In other words, it's not the geographical or administrative scale that is of essence here, but the relationship of internal and external partners. So it's not like capacity development for a country with external international partners, but could be a town dealing with input from the state government, or the state dealing with national government, or even a town dealing with World Bank input, and so on, which happens a lot when they are trying to do particular projects of energy or water or agriculture and so on. Okay, so let's leave it there, and then we'll continue in the next podcast on designing capacity development for resilience. So you can see how you are building the story on capacity development, defining capacity and defining what capacity development is, and we'll continue in the next podcast, maybe tomorrow. Okay.